I'm Matt Elman, and you're listening to the Complete Confidence with Cambridge podcast. We've got lots of useful tips and tricks to help you plan your school year as you prepare your learners for their Cambridge English qualifications. Whether you've been teaching exam classes for years or just at the start of your teaching career, come along with us. We'll help you unpack the English language exam journey using our own real-life experience and easy-to-follow examples from the exam preparation course Complete. So, let's get started.
Hello there, I'm Greg, and thanks for joining us all on this podcast today. There's three of us talking to you today. There's me and Matt. Hello, Matt.
Hello.
And Olha.
Hi.
Hello there. We're going to start the first podcast today. We're going to be talking overall about the idea of building autonomy. And what do we mean really by building autonomy? Well, it's the idea of allowing our students to govern and take control of their own learning, really, isn't it? And to be able to have confidence in them to go away and build their language skills, practice their exam skills, and essentially work towards that exam day and improve the journey there.
So what exactly would that mean for the students? What steps could they take to get to that autonomy?
The autonomy is an interesting word, and the first thing is really they've got to feel confident in doing it. They need to have the confidence that you are letting them go out the classroom and they can do it for themselves.
Now, I think that's crucial because I think it's not just saying go off and do it, go and study something. They need to know exactly how to do that, don't they?
Exactly, yeah. And thinking about this idea of self-study, and it's quite a biggie, isn't it, really? I mean, there's so much room for what you can talk to them about with self-study. For example, note-keeping. Note-keeping is something I think English language teachers will often talk about and try and direct their students to do.
Probably the key question with self-study is, how do you get them to do it? How do you encourage your students to take that step from seeing you as the person that's driving the learning to seeing themselves as the person that's driving their learning?
It's got to be a step-by-step thing, though, hasn't it? I mean, for example, one thing that I do is I get them all to have a special notebook. And in that notebook, they keep the key vocabulary and any special notes that they need. But then I can't just say to them, write down the vocabulary. No. Because what you'll end up doing is having just a list of 20 English words and nothing else. So I will give them a model on the board and I will show them, right, you can have, so we have one word, for example. So we have, supermarket at very low level. And then they can write the word also in their own language. Yeah. But then they can talk about, well, what's supermarket then? What kind of word is it? So is it a verb? Is it an adjective? And they write nouns. So that gives them a real clue. Another thing then is how do you say it? So it's not supermarket, where's the stress? Yep. And I show them how to do that. And if it's something like, I don't know, a small tool or something, they can also draw a picture. I don't know, it's very difficult to draw a supermarket, but you could have an example of, from their country, the name.
Well,
shopping trolley?
Yeah, shopping trolley. It could be a name, e.g.
Checkout.
Masoutis in Greece, or, Tesco's is quite international. So
if you've got a digital notepad, then you just
absolutely. I'm quite retro, so I give them a book. But absolutely, they could have it on their iPad, they could have it on their phone, but give them as much information, because if you just say, keep a note of that vocabulary, it's going to be very haphazard, isn't it?
I'm a big believer in putting it into context, so having a sentence. It gives you some of that information about what kind of word it is, what kind of words go around it, and it gives them a way to practice saying that word that's not just what they call the citation form. It's just, you can practice that word in a sentence, in a stream of connected speech. It's a skill, isn't it? It's a skill in its own right. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight.
I talked about this in a webinar I did for C1 Advanced students, and how to use the complete book to enable them to kind of keep these notes up that we're talking about. And it was a kind of a 3-stage analysis that I encouraged them to do. And it's basically look in a text, and whatever you can see, divide it into 3 categories. And the first one is, I know this word, I know this phrase, and I can use it. And that's fine. But beneath that, then get them to think about, well, I read this text and I understood this phrase, but I'm not confident about using it. And it's obviously the third category there is, I don't know the meaning of this and I can't use it. And it's trying to get them to focus on those second 2 categories rather than just blindly taking notes about everything that they see. Actually think about I understand it, but can I use it? And it's this idea of, well, what do we do with this vocabulary? Why do we keep it in a notebook? Is it just so we can read it and understand what, see different words? The aim for what we're doing should be, here's the vocabulary, and I want to start using it. So it's this idea of kind of getting it in as part of their active language skills.
And what's really nice, sorry to interrupt, what's really nice about that, you are encouraging them to be autonomous, to use metacognition, to
Absolutely.
actually to say, I think I know this word, I thought I knew it, or that phrase, but I'm not completely sure how I would use it.
Absolutely.
So this is another aspect of, making them independent.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Matt?
This kind of leads on to quite an interesting distinction, which is that learner autonomy is partly about kind of strategies that might apply to everybody, like note-taking, things like that. But it's also about understanding how you learn best. And it's about understanding where you are and what you need to do to move forward. So, what you just mentioned, Greg, is a great example of that. But, other things like understanding what kind of setup you need in order to study. Do you need to...
Oh, gosh. Organisation skills, especially for teenagers.
Organising your time, your resources, all of that kind of stuff. So it's as I say, it's partly about understanding the techniques that might be useful to everybody that's preparing for an exam, but then also understanding your own specific needs as a learner.
Yeah, absolutely. And also understanding that there is actually no end to that process. Because, you might think, okay, this is how I learn best. But you change over time anyway. And you find that different things, as long as you can remain adaptable to it, then you can keep going back to your developing language and your developing skills. And going back to that word metacognition that you used, Olga, I mean, it's a word that you wouldn't necessarily need the students to know.
Oh, no.
But they need to know what it means and how to do it.
They need to know that they have to take that responsibility. I've taught a lot of teenagers over the years, but actually it's true for adults too, that very often students think that we do that job for them.
Yeah.
We have to tell them what they know and what they don't know. And actually that's ridiculous, because they are the learner and ultimately they will take the exam. So they've got to take that responsibility. And it's also, as you were saying, we never stop learning.
No.
So if we're out of the room, if we're out of the picture, does that mean they'll never improve and they'll never continue learning? So these kind of skills, and I think Matt was referring to other learning to learn skills, are really, really useful. And I use that even with English. If I'm reading a textbook about something, I come across an unknown word, what do? I go straight to a dictionary. And if I'm not sure how to pronounce it, because it looks, it might be from a foreign language, I go and listen to the word as well. And I try and work out, can I use it as well? Can I show off with my colleagues and use this word? Yeah. So that kind of strategy of developing self-study skills should be lifelong, and it should also be transferable to other subjects.
Yep.
So, and not just languages, but how do you keep good notes? All these things. How do you go to reference books? How do you use the internet effectively and not get lost in it? And talk about, can you use this in other ways? Can you use it in life?
That's so important, because it is an investment and it does take time. But if you understand that putting in that time and making that investment now will also pay dividends later on. If you're developing your own learner autonomy when you're preparing for B1 preliminary, then those skills are still going to be useful when you do B2 first or C1 advanced. There's an investment there that's going to pay you back.
Yeah, just picking up on what you're saying there, Matt, and also what you were talking about with technology. At B2, they're progressing, and once you get to a higher level, you are progressing. But what often is difficult is the idiomatic language and kind of feeling your way to using that. So a really good tip is when the students have worked with the text in complete, whether it's first or advanced or even lower possibly, take a phrase, put it into a search engine, a Google or whatever, in quotation marks, and then you click on the news tab. And that gives you a lot of news stories.
That's a great idea.
And it kind of highlights the phrase that you're looking for in bold. But then you can actually read the news story, and it gives you loads of examples. So you're seeing language actually in context, in different examples, and how it's used by a kind of journalists who are a really good model. And the students can then figure out these things like, you were talking about an adjective. My cat is acrobatic.
Yes.
And then they can do that processing and think, well, actually, no, I don't. This is how I use it. And one of the best things I think is to give students plenty of examples.
And it's authentic. It's not kind of isolated in a way to strip it of meaning. It's actually really, and I think this is quite good. Is it Schmidt that talks about noticing?
Yes.
This idea that you've got to notice how language is used.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's difficult for students to do that in a course book, but when you see it like in news, I would say also get them to watch films and TV programs, choose to do that and try and notice language. Oh, I remember that phrase.
Yeah.
And really get them to be like language detectives.
Yeah.
That's a nice idea. And I think a great way to encourage that is just to make a little bit of space in the lesson. You could be at the start of the lesson. What have you noticed since the last class? What questions have you got?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just picking up on your idea, Greg, if you want to do the same thing for listening, then there's a great site called Youglish, where you can do the same thing. You put a phrase in and it will find that phrase in YouTube videos, and you can just hear example after example of that phrase and watch what's either side of it if you want to.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, really good. And in that way, I suppose we can move on to the next point, which is kind of looking at scaffolding, because as we say, students need help to develop these self-study skills. They're not going to get there on their own, and if we can direct them, lead them rather than kind of instruct, so it's direction rather than instruction.
It's the teacher's job, but I think a really important resource there is the other students in the room. I've definitely found that when it comes to learner autonomy and to learners kind of taking the reins a bit, there's nothing more powerful than one of the students in the class saying, this is what I do, or this is a resource that I found, and sharing that with the group. Yeah. And for whatever reason, that students listen to that far more than something coming from the teacher.
Completely right.
So any way of encouraging that, I think.
Well, that's a good teacher doing that, isn't it? It's stepping away and kind of directing that learning by allowing that to happen. Working in pairs, working in groups. Kind of resisting that urge to jump in. Yeah. Which is good monitoring, I think. It's where you're actively listening to what they're doing and thinking, right, what are the important points I need to get across to them? But let them go.
But I think the thing with scaffolding is, and the complete series is just all the activities are really well scaffolded, is that you lead students to success. I mean, I'm just sitting here looking at the key for schools course book, and I'm looking at page 55, and there's a lovely speaking activity, but it begins with a listening. So you've got a model, and the students listen to people describing pictures, they pull out really good language, they practice some of these chunks of language, and then they do the speaking task. And this way, they can do that task on their own, autonomously, without us as teachers having to jump in and say, no, you don't do it like that. And I think that is really crucial, that this is a step-by-step thing. We give them whatever help they need to do that task, because that's like being a parent, isn't it? You give the child or the student as much help, and then you say, okay, go off and do it. But they have to be successful at that task to move on, to be motivated, to be confident, to think, oh, actually, I've got it. I really understood that language. If you look at any of those activities, you'll find they are scaffolded in that way.
Well, it's kind of the language learning process in miniature, isn't it? It's noticing something, and Complete provides opportunities to notice and kind of encourages the students to notice things. Then it's analysing the language or thinking about it, understanding what's going on, and then using it yourself.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, noticing applies to that process as much as it does to the language itself. That if we can show students what's happening when they work through the course book in that way, they will hopefully then be able to kind of take it outside the classroom and do something similar.
It's pointing out the links, I think, as well. I think sometimes as teachers, we can see the links and we assume that the students will get it. But, with the example I gave there, they describe the pictures and then you say, right, was that a good description? Would that be good for you to do in the exam, and get them to think, oh, right, this is a model.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we know it's a model, but they it's another activity.
It's just a task, yeah. It's just something to do.
And if they're at, say, key or preliminary for schools, they might be quite young. They might have never really thought about that level of autonomy, thinking about taking responsibility for understanding the teacher's methodology or the book's methodology.
Absolutely, yeah. And the thing is as well, they have a lot of the time they haven't done the exam yet, so
No.
they're not familiar with it. So this is where, you know, kind of allowing them to see the value in what they are doing. You know, if you're doing language development or a vocabulary section that's come after a listening, looking at, for example, I've got page 19 of the advanced. Complete advanced book.
Is that the student's book?
The student's book, yeah. And they do the listening, and then they do an exercise about collocations with make, get, and do.
If you're expecting your learners to take control of their own learning, they need to know why they're doing that. They need to understand what the goal is, right?
Yeah.
But they also need to have some agency in the process, because they may be in a classroom that they've not chosen to be in. They may be doing an exam that they haven't chosen to do. How do you then provide the learners with a sense of agency?
One way I start doing this, especially with the younger students with choice, is that we do it together. So we'll be looking at the course book, and as we know, there's always too much to do in the time provided. And I would say, for example, oh, right, on page 54, we can either do that grammar exercise, or we can focus on the vocabulary. Which do you think is the most important? And just ask them the question. And they're quite often like, whoa, you're asking me? But you just start asking, say, so you probably will take control anyway and do what you thought you were going to do, but start asking them, because you can't just say, for homework, choose. You've got to introduce this idea of choice quite early.
Yeah.
And it's really, you know, once you've done it in class, you can do it for homework then. You can give them a choice between two activities. And I think that's a really easy way to do it. Don't just say do what you think is important, but actually structure it. And I would say that even with adults, you know, it's very difficult for them to know. But you can say you've got 3 activities in the course book or the workbook. Which do you think is more important for you to do for homework? You choose. You don't have to do them all. But I think it's very much, you've got to watch out and see if anybody looks confused, you get in there and you help them. And I said, I don't know. I said, well, maybe for you this would be useful, but just gradually introduce that, because I'm pretty sure they don't get choices in other subjects.
No. But I can hear teachers' voices in my head saying, oh, but they'll just choose the easy route. They'll take the easy one.
Well, it's interesting. So what would they regard as easy? Because if they look at it and it looks easy, it might be a crossword or something, and it looks like fun, but actually it's challenging on a different cognitive level to another activity. I mean, because everything is graded in the books. So, but even if they choose something that they feel is easy, isn't that going to build their confidence that they do it and they do it well?
Yeah.
You know, I think I would go on that strategy. I think, I think I can do that, so I'll do it. And there's nothing wrong with that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's also part of this process of helping them understand the shift, that it's a shift from you being the leader, the director of the learning, to them. And I think that is often what happens, that students kind of think, oh, wait, I can choose, brilliant, I'm gonna choose the easy option. But they're not going to choose the easy option the 10th time that you ask.
No.
Because they've got an exam to prepare for.
Another thing in terms of choice that is very valuable is where, a lot of classes are going to be mixed ability. And it's not always a nice thing to give everybody the same task to do if it's mixed ability, because it kind of, the higher level students kind of do it too quickly, the lower level ones struggle. But you can give them a choice of different kind of levels of different degrees of difficulty, and just put the sheets out at the front of the class and say, you choose. It's entirely up to you. These ones I think are more challenging. These ones are less challenging. come up and do whichever ones you want. And you often find that the students who have got that higher level of language will go straight for the more difficult ones.
Yeah. I met a teacher once who labelled them mild, medium and spicy.
Right.
Which is a nice way of...
I've done it before where I've obviously this is kind of quite costly, but it was just an experiment where I printed different activities out on different coloured paper. So it was kind of like yellow, blue and green. So you choose whichever ones you want. And I didn't explicitly say these ones are more difficult. I just said go up and have a quick look at it first and then decide whichever one you want. And I remember it was a really lovely classroom. And that's the thing that I think we got to stress on this point about choice, is that once your students get the idea that they have got that hand in it, they've got the choice to manage their own learning, they are developing that autonomy, it actually becomes quite a calmer place, doesn't it? Because everyone thinks, it's down to me.
Yeah, but certainly, I mean, what you were saying about not putting students who have problems with a particular task, not making them feel that they can't do it, you know, that there are other things you can do and you can help yourself, because they will find the right level of challenge, and challenge is really important. And that's why I would say when students make choices about homework, that they can find that, and that's great for mixed ability, is that you could say, you have a look, choose what you want to do. And I don't think it has to be as complicated as producing lots of other material, because the book kind of lends itself to that. You can have a look as a teacher at the activities in the workbook and say, right, I can see that this is a bit, you know, the writing or the grammar might be more challenging, but there's enough spread there.
Yeah, I think sometimes mixed ability or dealing with mixed ability classes is associated with lots of extra preparation, which is great if you've got time. Yeah, if you've got time to do that, that's fine.
Some of the questions we've had from teachers have said that. They said, you know, that I just don't have that much time to do all this preparation. So,
but I mean, things like what you just mentioned, Olha, if you give your students a time limit instead of a task limit, say, I'd like you to work on this task for 5 minutes and do whatever you can in that 5 minutes, and the quality is more important than the quantity. Or you could say, you don't have to do the questions in order. You look through them, do what you can first, and then kind of leave the more difficult stuff to the end.
Which then in turn lends itself to kind of exam day.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Oh, no. Where you've got a gap fill task, you know, students can fill that gap, and if they finish quickly, you can ask them to change the end of the sentence. So delete whatever comes after the gap and make me a new sentence with that. Things like that are, you know, easy ways of adapting tasks to make it slightly easier, slightly harder.
Yeah, you don't have to work exactly with what's on the page. Like, for example, on page 20 of the of Complete Advanced, there's vocabulary collocations with make, get, and do. And if you have a student who kind of goes, "Yep, I've done them all," and you've checked and they've got them all correct, then if there's no point in them sitting in class just going waiting for everybody else. You know, they can think about, well, are there other collocations that I know with make, get, and do? Can I write other sentences with it? If necessary, you know, you can just say, well, if you can't think of any, look through the book. Read some of the other text. Just scan through it quickly. Find examples of make, get, and do collocations in the book. Take notes. Write new sentences. So there's always ways of kind of like dealing with the fast finishes, but also supporting the students who might be finding things a little bit more challenging as well.
And those habits, I think, are really good for developing autonomy. Once they start doing that, you say, don't just look at those 2 pages that we're looking at in the lesson. You know, the book is there as a resource. And you can constantly go back to what you've done before, but you can also go back to the reference, because all the course books have those grammar references at the back, and extra activities as well that they can go to. So if you've finished or you want to do something different, you want to explore something, use the book, because the course book is such a great resource.
Absolutely. The
students need to see it as their own personal resource as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, if you think about how much content there is in any of the complete books, there's so much language in there that you can pull out. This is the thing, isn't it? Sometimes teachers think, well, I've got to teach an exam class, and I've got to teach, and I'm not going to be a language teacher anymore. And that's not necessarily the case. You know, you will have that ability, if you're a language teacher, to just go into a text and to take any language you want out of it. And that's kind of what we want our students to be able to do as well, isn't it?
Yeah, goes back to noticing, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
What do you notice? What stands out to you in this text? What questions have you got about it? Is there anything there that's new to you?
Yeah.
I ask students to choose from a text or a reading or a listening text to choose any new words or phrases that they would like to use in the future that would be relevant to them. So if we're reading about dangerous sports or something, what could you use to talk about your own personal interests, or here's a good word, miss, reckless. You say, I'm always reckless when I'm on my skateboard. But then that personalisation makes it meaningful and they can use it again.
Yeah.
So choose the words. I'm not going to tell you which 10 words you're going to learn from this text. I'll choose 5, but then you choose the other ones which are meaningful to you, which make you smile, which make you sad. But that emotional connection to language is always going to be personal.
Yeah.
All right, shall we move to some questions?
Let's start with this one. I don't know what my students do in self-study, and how can I monitor that? I can understand the concern there, because if you are giving the control to the student and you're the teacher and you've got to get them to this exam, you've got to get them to get the best possible grade, then there is that worry of, well, how can I do it? But I think there's 2 parts to this answer. Number one, you've just got to trust them to do it.
Absolutely.
You've got to kind of be confident in the fact that they will do it at some point. They might not pick it up immediately, but at some point, all students have a kind of a light bulb moment where they go, yeah, I need to start doing this. But obviously you have to be quite active in that. And one suggestion I might have is the warmer of a particular lesson. Spend just, while everybody's coming into class, put them into pairs or groups of 3, and then they just have to share what they've written in their vocabulary notebooks. If you've given them a task to go away and find language, then you don't have to, as the teacher, be standing over them and saying, I want to see what you've written in it. Put them into groups. And then just as a very casual thing, then just go around to the groups and say, okay, what does Raoul put in his notes? And you ask another student to sort of summarise if there's anything that they've learned or they've found. I think that's the thing. It's involving the class as well and stepping back as a teacher, even though the urge is telling you, I need to get my red pen out and tick things. You don't need to do that.
I do, I think, where I give out to students, or they print it out or they have it digitally, a weekly thing where they fill in what they've done. And we talk about all the different possibilities of things they do. So we talk about the digital resources that they can use.
Yeah.
We talk about, the fact you could watch a film, you could listen to a song, and then they fill it in and they write what they did and what they learned. And it could be like just listening to a song. It helped me listen and understand something that was quick, and just get them to talk about it, but to say, what do you think you learned?
Yeah.
And I think that's another element of metacognition is I don't know what you've learned. I can't control that. Even if I give you specific homework, you can do it. It looks like it's been done, but have you learnt anything? So actually, that's something I do. You were going to say something, Matt.
Took the words right out of my mouth. Because I think the only thing I had to add to what Greg said was that there's an element here of self-assessment and self-evaluation.
Yeah.
And if you do something like what you've just described, ask them to write down what they did and what they learned from it, then the obvious next step is to kind of say, well, could you do better? Like, how successful were you in terms of your own learning? And where do you think that's going to lead to in terms of the exam? Because as you say, we don't know what you've learned, but we also don't know, it's very hard for us to see how well you're developing these skills of learning autonomy. Yeah. So you tell me.
Absolutely.
Are you becoming a more autonomous learner? And if not, what can we do to help?
There's an interesting question here that I think maybe, Matt, this would be a good one for you, because it relates to collaborative student-centred work. And a teacher, one of our listeners, has asked this question, and she says that her problem having classes where that she wants them to be autonomous is she doesn't have time to monitor them.
I mean, I get it, first of all. If you've got a large class, then it can be really difficult to get round the whole group and feel that you're listening to everybody in that group. I think I'd suggest, first of all, bringing in the students and using the students as a resource.
Yeah.
So if you've got students working in a group, you can have someone there within that group either making some notes, kind of acting as a scribe, or perhaps kind of checking off target language that they should be using, that you've been studying in the class.
That's a really good point. And everybody is busy, and the time is short when you're a teacher, and you've got so much to do. But make sure that you remember I've made notes, and you're aware of what you have done to this point. You need to keep notes of what you've done in class, the language that might have come up, because there's going to be lots of language that comes up in any class that isn't in the book. And if you're kind of not taking any note of that, then you're not going to be able to monitor what they're doing, because part of the monitoring is ensuring that what you've done, they're putting it into practice.
And I think, it also seems to suggest to me, if you don't have time to monitor, what are you doing instead? Are you interfering? Are you getting in there with each group and trying to micromanage what they're doing? I think this is kind of, my role there, which is you have to stand back.
Yeah.
Because, as we've said, the monitoring is such an important part of our
It's
job.
such a lovely part of the job
It
as
is,
well.
no, it's fabulous, because sometimes you go, oh my goodness, what they've just produced this incredible language, and we can't control it, but to the extent that we also shouldn't suppress it.
No.
But by standing back, letting them get on with it and giving them time, not jumping in and telling them the right answer, just leave them, because sometimes you can't come up with the right answer immediately. You need to process. So, and I think this whole idea of monitoring, having classes that are student-centred, letting them find ways of doing things, this is a real key to get students to progress. And they can see then that what they've done. They can go, whoa, I just said that in English. That's really cool. And they pat themselves on the back.
Yeah, I think that's why I interpreted it as more, I don't have time to monitor everybody.
Yeah.
As a kind of missing word. But yeah, what you just said is completely true.
All those things are true, yes.
I think if you're also bringing in students and asking them to do some of the monitoring themselves, you're giving them an insight into what the examiner's doing, the speaking examiner anyway.
Yeah.
And that's an opportunity to help them, or to help introduce them to some of the exam criteria and help them understand what the examiner's looking for.
Absolutely.
Come exam day, to kind of demystify the whole process a bit, and to help them understand that it's not a kind of question of, I don't know, does the examiner like you or not? Did you wear the right clothes? It's about what you say, and if you know what to say, then you can get a good grade.
Yeah, so in summary, really, if you don't have time to monitor, then you really need to make it.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
That's basically your job.
And just say, I don't control everything. I don't control very much at all as a teacher. I try and set up the situation. I try and facilitate the learning, but what will happen is up to the students. It's not me that's going to have that magic happen.
With the exception of what happens after you've monitored,
Yes.
which is when you obviously need to take what you've heard and give your students some feedback.
Oh, absolutely.
They need to know how to do the task better in order to improve.
Yeah, the feedback is, obviously, don't just walk around the classroom listening and smiling. Oh, lovely. Anyway, off you go. Yeah, the feedback is a hugely important thing. And that's the brilliant part of being a language teacher. One of the many brilliant parts of being a language teacher is listening to what your students are saying, thinking, this is coming along, this is getting better. And here is a suggestion for how we can improve it some more.
Yeah. And that's hard. Let's not pretend it's an easy thing to do. It takes time, it takes practice.
Of course it does, but that's a really engaging part of the job, isn't it?
For sure.
Let's recap.
Okay, shall we just round up what we've been talking about? Because we've talked about a lot of things in this podcast. The topic was building autonomy. So what would you say were the key points that we've made today? Greg?
We started off talking about self-study and building habits for actually being able to keep notes and to guide your own learning and to be able to select language that you want to learn and use and that is going to improve yourself, and just this whole practice of learning to learn and building that sort of ability, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, we also talked about how it's a process that takes time and it's a process that needs some support, so we can't expect too much too soon.
No.
That's where the scaffolding comes in, isn't
Indeed.
it? It's step by step, giving them a lot of support to begin with and then gradually reducing that.
Yeah, but making sure that support doesn't come in the form of jumping in and taking control of the situation. So you're monitoring, you're not directing.
Absolutely.
We talked about mixed abilities,
yes,
how to support students' mixed abilities, and that there were ways of doing that if you've got time, and there are ways of doing it if you don't have so much time as well.
Sure.
And we talked about choice,
yes,
and the power of choice.
Absolutely. And we also touched on collaboration and getting students working together. And that actually really allows the teacher to be able to step back and be that, in the monitoring situation, that you let the students do all the work, talk to each other, explain to each other, help each other, and you can be the facilitator, the monitor, and then give the feedback.
Yeah, so I suppose it's kind of like building autonomy through good classroom practice, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we hope that's been useful for you all. And remember that you can listen to this podcast again if you've missed anything.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
That's it for today. Discover more episodes from this series on our website, cambridge.org/completeconfidence. We have podcast episodes for every level of the Cambridge exams. Come back and join us again soon. And don't worry, you've got this.
You've been listening to the Complete Confidence with Cambridge podcast, brought to you by Cambridge University Press and Assessment.